The Galactic Academy of Advanced Sciences stood like a gleaming crystal against the purple sky of planet Nexus. Its tall spires reached toward the three moons that hung overhead, while streams of hovering vehicles moved between its buildings in orderly lines. Inside one of the Academy's many study halls, three human students sat at their workspace, trying to stay awake during their afternoon classes. Jae-ho Kim rubbed his eyes and looked at his digital tablet, where complex equations floated in holographic display. Next to him, Hae-nul Park had his head propped up on his hand, while Dae-yun Lee fought back another yawn. They were the first humans ever accepted into the Academy's prestigious exchange program, and they were determined to prove themselves worthy of the opportunity. "Humans," called out Professor Ryun, their instructor, "perhaps you would like to explain why you appear so unfocused during this important lesson on stellar mechanics." The professor's silver skin sparkled under the room's bright lights, and all four of his eyes fixed upon the three students. Dae-yun straightened up in her chair. "We apologize, Professor. We were up late last night finishing our quantum physics assignments." Her voice was clear and professional, despite her tiredness. The other students in the class, beings from 50 different species across the galaxy, turned to look at them. Some had multiple eyes, others had scaled skin that changed colors with their emotions, and a few were merely clouds of intelligent gas contained within special suits. "Ah yes," Professor Ryun said, his tone softening. "I sometimes forget about the human need for regular sleep cycles. Most fascinating how your species requires such frequent periods of unconsciousness to function properly." Jae-ho smiled politely. He had explained human sleep patterns at least 100 times since arriving at the Academy 3 months ago. "Yes, sir. Most humans need about 8 hours of sleep each day to perform at their best." A student made of pure energy raised their glowing hand. "But how do you learn while sleeping? Surely you must connect to the knowledge networks during your rest period." "We don't actually learn while sleeping," Hae-nul explained. "Our brains process information and form memories, but we're not conscious during sleep. We just rest." This caused a wave of whispers through the classroom. The concept of just resting seemed to puzzle many of the alien students. Several of them began taking notes about this strange human behavior. Professor Ryun cleared his throat, a sound like chimes in the wind. "While human biology is certainly interesting, we must return to our lesson. Today's topic is particularly important, as it relates to the Academy's role in maintaining the stellar regulation systems of this sector." The professor activated a large hologram in the center of the room, showing a complex network of artificial satellites orbiting various stars. These systems are vital to preventing premature stellar decay and potential supernovas. The Academy is responsible for monitoring and maintaining this network, which protects billions of lives across thousands of worlds. Despite their tiredness, the three humans paid close attention. They had learned that the ability to control and stabilize stars was one of the greatest achievements of galactic civilization. The technology was far beyond anything humans had developed on Earth, but the underlying principles were fascinating. As the lesson continued, Dae-yun noticed something interesting about the stellar regulation system's design. It reminded her of something she had studied in Earth's history, the way ancient steam engines used pressure differentials. She made a note to discuss it with Jae-ho and Hae-nul later, but right now, staying awake was her primary challenge. The class ended with Professor Ryun assigning another complex project. As the students filed out of the room, the three humans checked their schedules. They had 3 more classes to go before they could return to their quarters for some much-needed rest. "Sometimes I think they accepted us into this program just to study our sleeping habits," Jae-ho joked as they walked through the crystal corridors. Hae-nul laughed. "Maybe, but we're proving that humans can keep up with the best minds in the galaxy, even if we need a few naps along the way." Dae-yun nodded in agreement, then quickly covered another yawn. "Come on, we have advanced quantum mechanics next. And this time, let's try to stay awake without drinking those energy capsules." Last time, Jae-ho started speaking in binary code. The three friends made their way to their next class, unaware that their unique human needs, especially their requirement for sleep, would soon play a crucial role in saving countless lives across the galaxy. Night had fallen on planet Nexus. The three moons cast a soft, multicolored light through the Academy's crystal walls. Most species were still active, working in laboratories or studying in the vast libraries. However, in their specially designed quarters, the three human students had already settled into their nightly rest cycle. At exactly 3:27 a.m. local time, every display screen in the Academy suddenly flashed red. A deep, resonating alarm began to sound throughout the complex. Emergency lights activated, filling the corridors with pulsing crimson illumination. In the central control room, Chief Administrator Mira's metallic scales shifted from their usual golden color to a worried blue. The emergency signal coming through their primary communications array was unlike anything they had seen in the past 50 years. "Report," Administrator Mira commanded, their voice calm despite their changing colors. Senior Technical Officer Rux moved their hovering platform closer to the main display. The stellar regulation system for the Proxima cluster is showing critical failures across multiple nodes. Initial readings indicate a cascade failure in progress. The room filled with more officers and professors, including Professor Rian, who had been analyzing data in the adjacent research center. His silver skin had dulled to a worried gray. "How long until complete system failure?" Professor Rian asked, all four of his eyes focused on the rapidly changing numbers on the main screen. "Current calculations suggest we have approximately 8 hours before the system fails completely," Rux responded. "If that happens, 3 stars in the cluster will begin an accelerated decay process. We could be looking at multiple supernovas within days." Administrator Mira's scales shifted to a deep purple, indicating serious concern. Population count in the affected systems: 17 billion sentient beings across 12 inhabited worlds. Professor Rian answered quickly, not counting the space stations and mining colonies. The administrator made an immediate decision. Activate all Academy personnel. Every scientist, every engineer, every student above 3rd year standing. We need every capable mind working on this. Throughout the Academy, doors slid open automatically. Lights activated in every room. Emergency protocols awakened all dormant or resting species using specialized techniques, safe for each biology. Gaseous beings were stimulated with electromagnetic pulses. Crystalline life forms were energized with focused light beams. Energy beings received direct power surges. However, in the human quarters, 3 students continued to sleep peacefully. The Academy's emergency systems, advanced as they were, had never been designed with human sleep patterns in mind. The standard awakening protocols had no effect on their unique biology. A junior officer noticed this anomaly on their monitoring systems. "Administrator, we're unable to wake the human students. Their room's emergency systems are functioning, but they remain in their sleep state." Professor Rian moved to a communication panel. "Send a medical team. Perhaps they can wake them safely. We need every mind working on this problem." The medical team arrived at the human quarters 5 minutes later. They tried several approved methods to wake the sleeping students, increasing the room's light levels, raising the temperature, and even using gentle sonic pulses. Nothing worked. The humans simply shifted in their beds, pulled their covers tighter, and continued sleeping. "Fascinating," the lead medical officer noted. "Their vital signs show they are in perfect health. They are simply unreachable during this sleep cycle." In the central control room, Administrator Mira made another decision. "We cannot waste more time attempting to wake them. Begin emergency protocols without the humans. Divide all available personnel into research teams. We need solutions within the hour." As the Academy's brightest minds began their work on the crisis, Jaiho, Humnul, and Dalyun continued their peaceful sleep, unaware that the greatest challenge of their academic careers was unfolding around them. The gentle sound of their breathing contrasted sharply with the urgent activities taking place throughout the rest of the Academy. Outside their windows, all 3 moons of Nexus shone brightly, while billions of lives hung in the balance. waiting for a solution that might come too late, or perhaps, as fate would have it, at exactly the right time. 3 hours had passed since the initial alert. Inside the Academy's main emergency center, hundreds of beings from across the galaxy worked frantically to solve the stellar regulation crisis. Holographic displays covered every wall, showing complex calculations and simulations of the failing system. Professor Rian moved between different research teams, his silver skin now a dull gray from stress. Despite having some of the brightest minds in the galaxy working on the problem, they were still far from a solution. The professor found himself thinking about his sleeping human students, wondering if their unique way of thinking might have helped. "We need to try waking them again," Professor Rian announced to Administrator Mira, who was coordinating efforts from a central platform. "The humans have shown remarkable problem-solving abilities in my classes. Their different perspective could be valuable." Administrator Mira's scales shifted to a thoughtful green color. "Very well. But we must be careful not to harm them. Their biology is more fragile than most species here." The Academy's medical team prepared for their second attempt to wake the humans. This time, they'd brought more advanced equipment. Dr. Lana, a specialist in xenobiology, led the team to the human quarters. The hallway outside was quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos in the rest of the Academy. Inside their rooms, Jai-Ho, Ho-Nul, and Da-Yun continued their peaceful sleep. Ji-Ho had rolled over and was now hugging his pillow. He-Nul had kicked off his blanket but remained deep in sleep. Da-Yun had pulled her covers up to her chin, completely undisturbed by the earlier attempts to wake her. Dr. Lana tried several new approaches. First, they used a device that simulated Earth's morning sunlight. The humans simply turned away from the light. Next, they tried playing recordings of Earth's morning sounds. Birds chirping, gentle alarms, and even the smell of coffee. The humans responded only by shifting slightly in their beds. "Remarkable," Dr. Lana noted in their medical log. "Their ability to maintain sleep despite external stimuli is unlike anything I've seen in my 300 years of medical practice." In a final attempt, they received permission to use a mild biosonic pulse, a device that usually worked on even the most deep-sleeping species. When they activated it, He-Nul merely mumbled something about 5 more minutes and pulled his pillow over his head. Back in the emergency center, frustration was growing. Senior Technical Officer Rux's latest calculations showed they now had less than 5 hours before the stellar regulation system failed completely. The teams had proposed and rejected dozens of potential solutions. The human students' academic records show exceptional problem-solving abilities, Professor Rian insisted to the gathered team leaders. Yesterday, Da-Yun made an interesting observation about the similarity between our stellar regulation systems and some ancient human technology. "If we could just wake them." Administrator Mira interrupted, their scales now showing bands of urgent red. "We cannot wait any longer." The medical team reports that normal sleep cycles for humans last approximately 8 hours. By the time they wake naturally, it may be too late. Professor Rian looked at the main display, watching as another set of calculations failed to provide a solution. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "we are approaching this problem from too complex an angle. The humans often surprise me with their ability to see simple solutions to complex problems." In the quiet human quarters, far from the intensive work and growing panic, the 3 students continued their restful sleep. Their digital tablets sat silent on their desks, still displaying the notes from yesterday's classes. On Da-Yun's tablet, clearly visible, was her note about the similarity between stellar regulation systems and steam engines, a connection that might prove vital if only someone were awake to explore it. The Academy's emergency lights continued to pulse red, and the urgent activity continued throughout the facility. But in these 3 rooms, time moved at its own peaceful pace, counting down to the moment when 3 well-rested human minds would finally wake to face the crisis that had the entire galaxy's brightest minds stumped. In the 6th hour of the emergency, the atmosphere in the Academy's emergency center had grown increasingly tense. Administrator Mira's scales had shifted to a deep, worried purple as they reviewed the latest reports. The stellar regulation system's failure was accelerating faster than their initial predictions. Professor Rian stood before the central display, analyzing data with two other senior scientists. His silver skin had become almost black with exhaustion, and all four of his eyes showed signs of strain. The containment field around star system Proxima 7 is degrading at an exponential rate, he reported, his voice heavy with concern. Senior Technical Officer Rux moved their hovering platform closer to the display. Our latest calculations indicate we now have less than 2 hours before total system failure. The first star will begin its collapse within minutes after that. The emergency center had become a scene of intense activity. Teams of scientists from every major species worked at various stations. Some members of gaseous species had merged together to increase their computational power. Energy beings pulsed with rapid calculations, their light dimming with each failed attempt at a solution. Team 12's proposal to reinforce the containment field has failed, announced a crystalline being, their faceted surface flashing with disappointment. The power requirements would exceed our available resources by 300%. Administrator Mira turned to address the assembled teams. We have received word that evacuation protocols have begun in the affected systems, but there is not enough time to move even a fraction of the population to safety. We must find a solution. Professor Rian moved to another workstation, where a group of students was reviewing historical data about the stellar regulation system. Despite their advanced knowledge, every proposed solution seemed to create more problems than it solved. The complexity of the system, usually its greatest strength, now worked against them. The system's automated repair protocols are no longer responding, reported a cloud-like being from the monitoring station. We estimate total communications failure within the next 30 minutes. In a quiet corner of the emergency center, a junior officer maintained watch over the sleeping human quarters through the security feeds. The three students had not moved in the past hour, their peaceful rest a stark contrast to the crisis unfolding around them. Administrator Mira gathered the team leaders for another emergency briefing. We have tried 27 different approaches. Each has failed due to either power requirements, timing constraints, or system incompatibilities. We need new ideas, and we need them quickly. The display screens around the room showed the status of each star in the affected cluster. The numbers continued to shift toward critical levels. Warning indicators flashed more frequently, their urgent red glow reflecting off the worried faces of the Academy's brightest minds. Perhaps, suggested one of the senior engineers, a being made of pure energy, we should consider a controlled collapse of the outer systems to save the inner ones. Professor Rian shook his head. The loss of life would still be in the billions. There must be another way. He found himself looking again at the security feed, showing his sleeping human students. Something about their strange requirement for rest nagged at his tired mind, but he couldn't quite grasp why it seemed important. In the background, the main computer continued its countdown. The displays showed various simulations of the impending stellar collapse, each scenario more catastrophic than the last. The Academy's greatest minds, representing thousands of years of combined knowledge and experience, struggled to find a solution that seemed to slip further away with each passing minute. As the crisis deepened and options dwindled, no one realized that the simplest solution would come from those who were, at that very moment, getting the rest they needed to see what everyone else had missed. The Academy's chronometer showed 7:30 a.m. local time when Jae-ho Kim finally opened his eyes. He stretched and yawned, feeling refreshed after a full night's sleep. The room's environmental controls had maintained the perfect temperature, just as they did every night. Through his window, he could see the 3 moons of Nexus setting against the morning sky. In the adjacent room, Hae-Nul Park was also waking up. He sat on the edge of his bed, running his hands through his slightly messy hair. The pulsing red emergency lights caught his attention, but in his half-awake state, he assumed it was some kind of morning illumination program. Dae-Eun Lee emerged from her room a few minutes later, already dressed in her academy uniform. She noticed the unusual lighting in the corridor, but was more focused on her morning routine. Ready for breakfast? She asked her fellow humans, who had gathered in the common area of their quarters. I'm starving, Jaiho replied, adjusting his uniform. I hope they have those blue fruit pastries again. They taste almost like earth blueberries. The three friends made their way through the academy's corridors, noticing they seemed unusually busy for this time of morning. Various species rushed past them, many looking tired and stressed. Several gave them strange looks as they walked by. Is it just me? Haynul said, suppressing a yawn. Or is everyone acting weird today? They reached the academy's dining hall, which was usually quiet during human breakfast hours. Today, however, it was filled with frantic activity. Beings of all species huddled around tables covered in data tablets and holographic displays. The usual breakfast serving stations were completely ignored. Something's definitely not right, Dae-yun observed, her fully awake mind now registering the emergency lights and unusual atmosphere. Look at Professor Rian over there. I've never seen his skin so dark. Professor Rian noticed them at that moment. All four of his eyes widened in surprise, and his silver skin lightened slightly. He rushed over to their group, moving faster than they had ever seen him move before. You're awake, finally. The professor's voice carried both relief and urgency. We've been trying to wake you for the past 6 hours. The three humans exchanged confused looks. Jiho spoke first. 6 hours. What's wrong, Professor? Before the professor could answer, Administrator Mira glided over to their location. Their scales shifted rapidly between colors, showing a mix of emotions the humans couldn't quite interpret. The human students, they said, their voice carrying across the hall. Perhaps now. The administrator was interrupted by Senior Technical Officer Rux, who hovered nearby with urgent news. The containment field around Proxima 7 has reached critical levels. We have less than 40 minutes before total system failure. Dae-yun reached for a nearby data tablet, her eyes scanning the emergency information displayed on its screen. Her expression changed from confusion to understanding, then to deep concentration. The stellar regulation system, she said softly. This is related to what we discussed in class yesterday. Jaiho and Haynul moved to look over her shoulder at the data. Despite having just woken up, their minds were fresh and clear, unaffected by the hours of stress and failed attempts that had exhausted the rest of the academy. We need to get you to the emergency center immediately, Professor Rian insisted, but perhaps you should get your morning beverages first. Your human drinks. Coffee, was it? Haynul nodded, already moving toward the beverage dispensers. Trust me, Professor, you want us fully caffeinated for this. As they quickly gathered their morning drinks, the three humans had no idea that their next few minutes would change how the galaxy viewed both humanity and the importance of a good night's sleep. The emergency center fell silent as the three humans entered, each carrying their morning beverages. The various beings who had been working through the night paused their calculations to observe the newcomers. Administrator Mira's scales shifted to a hopeful shade of green as they approached the central platform. Professor Rian quickly guided them to the main display, where complex diagrams of the stellar regulation system filled the air with ghostly light. We have approximately 35 minutes before total system failure, he explained, his voice carrying both exhaustion and hope. Dae-yun took a long sip of her coffee, her eyes scanning the technical readouts with growing interest. Could you show us the basic system architecture? She requested, her voice calm despite the urgency surrounding them. The display changed, showing a simplified version of the stellar containment network. Jiho and Haynul moved closer, their fresh minds taking in the information without the burden of failed attempts that weighed on everyone else. Interesting, Haynul murmured, pointing to a particular section of the diagram. The energy flow pattern here reminds me of something. Jiho, doesn't this look like that old thermal management system we studied in engineering history? Jiho nodded, his eyes brightening with recognition. the one from the early fusion reactors on Earth. Diane, this connects to what you were saying yesterday about steam engines, doesn't it? Diane stepped forward, her fingers moving through the holographic display to highlight specific sections. Exactly. The stellar regulation system is incredibly advanced, but at its core, it's managing energy flow and pressure, just like those early human technologies. The assembled aliens watched in confusion as the three humans discussed seemingly primitive technology. Several energy beings pulsed with skepticism, while crystalline entities refracted light in patterns indicating doubt. Think about it, Daeyeon continued, addressing the room. When early steam engines had pressure problems, the solution wasn't always to add more complexity. Sometimes, they just needed a simple pressure release valve in the right place. Understanding began to dawn on Professor Ryan's face, his silver skin brightening slightly. You're suggesting we look at this as a pressure management problem, rather than a containment failure. Yes, Jaiho confirmed, moving to a different section of the display. The system isn't failing because it's too weak. It's failing because it's too rigid. It needs a way to safely release excess energy in controlled bursts. Hanul had already begun inputting calculations into a nearby console. If we reconfigure these nodes here and here, he pointed to specific points in the network, we can create what amounts to a pressure release system. The excess energy can be vented into nearby uninhabited space. The room erupted with activity as other scientists began reviewing the human suggestion. Energy beings pulsed rapidly as they ran new simulations. Gaseous entities swirled in patterns of intense calculation. This is... Administrator Mira's scales rippled with amazement. This is remarkably simple, but our simulations confirm it could work. Professor Ryan was already coordinating with implementation teams. The modification can be made remotely. We can begin the reconfiguration immediately. As the room buzzed with renewed purpose, Delian turned to her fellow humans with a small smile. Sometimes you need to step back and get some rest to see the simple solution hidden in all the complexity. The three humans stood together, sipping their beverages while watching the Academy's finest minds transform their basic insight into a working solution. Their fresh perspective, uncluttered by hours of failed attempts, had provided exactly what was needed. A reminder that sometimes the simplest answer is the right one. Implementation teams across the Academy worked with remarkable speed to put the human solution into action. Senior Technical Officer Rux coordinated the efforts from the central platform, their hovering form moving swiftly between different control stations as the modification process began. Energy venting systems are being reconfigured, reported a gaseous entity, its voice echoing through the emergency center. Converting containment nodes to pressure release valves now. The main display showed a real-time visualization of the changes. The complex network of stellar regulation systems began to shift, the energy flow patterns adapting to the new configuration. Hanul watched carefully, making minor adjustments to the calculations as needed. First pressure release valve activated, Jaiho announced, monitoring the system's response. Energy levels in Proxima 7 are beginning to stabilize. Daeyeon worked alongside Professor Ryan, their fingers moving through holographic controls as they fine-tuned the release parameters. The professor's silver skin had brightened considerably, showing relief as the solution proved effective. Remarkable. Administrator Mira observed, their scales shifting to a bright blue of satisfaction. The system is responding better than our simulations predicted. The solution is elegant in its simplicity. The emergency center's atmosphere had transformed from one of desperate tension to focused efficiency. The various species worked together seamlessly, implementing the human's basic concept with their advanced technical expertise. Second and third release valves coming online, Hanul reported. Energy dispersion patterns are exactly as calculated. The excess stellar energy is being safely vented into the designated empty space. The main display showed the critical warning indicators beginning to fade. One by one, the red alert signals turned green as the stellar regulation system stabilized. The containment field around Proxima 7 strengthened, its integrity returning to normal levels. All primary systems functioning within optimal parameters, announced Senior Technical Officer Rux. The crisis has been averted. Total time from implementation to resolution, 15 minutes and 23 seconds. A wave of relief swept through the emergency center. Energy beings pulsed with bright celebration colors. Crystalline entities refracted light in patterns of joy. Even the usually reserved gaseous beings swirled in happy patterns. Professor Rion turned to his 3 human students, all 4 of his eyes showing deep appreciation. You have accomplished something extraordinary today. Your fresh perspective and understanding of basic principles saved billions of lives. Daeun smiled modestly. Sometimes the most advanced problems can be solved with simple solutions. We just needed to see past the complexity to the basic physics underneath. And a good night's sleep helped, Jai-Ho added with a grin, finishing the last of his morning coffee. Administrator Mira addressed the assembled teams. This event will be recorded in the Academy's history. The humans have taught us a valuable lesson about the importance of rest and the power of fresh perspective. Hamnul looked at the stabilized system displays. The solution reminds me of something my engineering professor on Earth used to say. The more complex the system, the more important it is to remember the basics. The 3 humans stood together, watching as their solution continued to work perfectly. The stellar regulation system had been transformed from a rigid containment network into a dynamic, self-regulating system that could adapt to pressure changes naturally. I believe, Professor Rion said thoughtfully, we will need to update our emergency protocols. Perhaps we should consider the benefits of having well-rested minds available during crisis situations. The Academy's emergency lights finally stopped their red pulsing, returning to their normal gentle glow. The crisis was over, resolved not by the most advanced technology, but by 3 sleepy humans who remembered to look for the simple answer first. 1 week after the stellar regulation crisis, the Galactic Academy of Advanced Sciences prepared for a special ceremony. The Grand Assembly Hall had been decorated with symbols from all member worlds, including a prominent display of Earth's planetary emblem. Administrator Mira stood at the central podium, their scales shimmering with formal gold and silver patterns. The assembled audience included representatives from every major species in the galaxy, many of whom had traveled great distances to attend this historic event. We gather today to recognize an achievement that has changed our understanding of problem-solving approaches. Administrator Mira began, their voice carrying clearly through the hall. The events of last week have taught us valuable lessons about the importance of diverse perspectives in scientific advancement. Professor Rion sat in the front row, his silver skin polished to a brilliant shine for the occasion. He watched with pride as recordings of the crisis solution played on large displays throughout the hall, showing how the simple pressure release system had saved billions of lives. There was, however, one small problem with the ceremony. The guests of honor were notably absent. Our human students send their regrets, Administrator Mira announced, their scales rippling with what the audience now recognized as amusement. As it is currently 2:30 p.m. local time, they are observing their traditional afternoon nap period. A wave of understanding laughter moved through the assembly. In the weeks since the crisis, the Academy had comprehensively revised its policies regarding rest periods for all species. The human success had demonstrated the vital importance of maintaining natural biological cycles, even during emergencies. In their quarters, Jai-Ho, Hamnul, and Daeun slept peacefully, unaware of the ceremony being held in their honor. Their solution had already been incorporated into stellar regulation systems across the galaxy, with the new human pressure release protocol becoming standard operating procedure. The Academy's research department had published a fascinating paper titled The Advantage of Rest: How Human Sleep Cycles Led to Revolutionary Engineering Solutions. It had quickly become the most accessed document in the Academy's vast database. Back in the ceremony, Administrator Mira continued their address. The medals of honor we had planned to present will be given to our human students once they complete their rest period. Their achievement reminds us that sometimes the most advanced civilizations can learn from those we considered less developed. Professor Rion rose to speak next. We have modified our emergency protocols to ensure that at least 30% of our problem-solving teams are well rested at any given time. This sleep rotation system, inspired by our human students, has already improved our response capabilities in other situations. The Academy had also installed new signs throughout its facilities, displaying a message in multiple languages. Remember the human principle. Sometimes the simplest solution requires the clearest mind. Later that evening, when Jeho, Helmnul, and Dayun finally arrived at the assembly hall, they found their medals waiting along with a large cake made to resemble Earth's ancient steam engines. The ceremony was repeated, though in a much shorter version, as everyone was aware that the humans would need to sleep again in a few hours. "We don't know how to thank you," Administrator Mira said as they presented the medals. "Just remember," Dayun replied with a smile, "if there's ever another crisis, check if someone needs a nap first." The story of the humans who slept through a galactic crisis became legendary at the Academy. Years later, students would still tell tales of how 3 well-rested minds had seen what hundreds of exhausted experts had missed. It served as a permanent reminder that progress comes not just from advancing technology, but from understanding and respecting the basic needs that make problem-solving possible.